Welcome to the 8th episode of Inside Illustration. This episode is part of the Handmade illustration season of Inside Illustration, a biannual suite of content brought to you by the Association of Illustrators. We are a UK-based organisation with members from all around the world who support illustrators across all areas of their professional lives, offering extensive business advice, including reviews of clients' contracts, as well as presenting events, campaigning for illustrators' rights and running the annual World Illustration Awards. There is exclusive access to the full range of content for Inside Illustration for AOI members at theaoi.com/inside-illustration, where we have articles, a range of resources, and the opportunity for members to take part in an exclusive creative course on handmade illustration. Some content is free for non-members. I'm your host, Rachel Emily Taylor, artist, writer and course leader of BA Illustration at Camberwell College of Arts. The draw of working with physical materials to create three-dimensional content has remained strong for many illustrators. The tactile quality and organic character of materials such as paper and card, clay and ceramics, and textiles and threads sustain their long-standing connection to human-made artefacts and continue to hold a recognisable appeal as the basis for illustration. Many illustrators use these materials to create products to sell directly to the public, but there is also a market for work with a distinctive handmade element among illustration commissioners, who are often seeking a visual approach that stands out from flat two-dimensional work. Three-dimensional illustration brings added depth to images for advertising, design, site-based constructions, as well as editorial and publishing, and we have a special focus on books in this episode. In this session, we're talking to two guests who have embraced the appeal of illustrations created from a distinctly handmade form, cut and sculpted paper. Gail Armstrong, an award-winning illustrator working in paper sculpture, and Editorial Director, Preschool and Complex Novelty at Bonnier Books, Ruth Symons. Welcome. Gail, can you tell us about your background and experience with your practice with illustration?
Well, I'm London-based, but I graduated from Glasgow School of Art back in 1988. So I've been doing this for quite a long time. My degree was actually in graphic design, illustration and photography. And when I left my postgraduate there, I worked as a graphic designer initially, having thought prior to that I would be an illustrator. And then I just gradually over the years made the transition back into illustration, which is where my heart lay, really.
Right. And Ruth?
So I've been in publishing for 15 and a bit years, and it's always been children's publishing for me, but I've worked in sort of all aspects of full-colour publishing, so from preschool and baby books right up to longer form non-fiction that's actually for a slightly older, often crossover adult market. But I became editorial director of a very niche job title, Preschool and Complex Novelty, a couple of years ago at Templar, and that's because I work on much more of the sort of paper engineered side of the list. So pop-ups, flaps, anything that sort of jumps out of a book at you is really my niche and where my passion lies. And of course, that's where I've come to work with Gail on the wonderful Paper World books. Yeah.
It's fantastic to have you both in as you've worked together, and it's great to hear about that relationship between illustrator and commissioner. Gail, can I ask some questions about your practice? I was really interested in how you build up those necessary skills for creating illustrations made of paper. Do all of your 3D illustrations start with a sketch?
Yes. For me, the root of everything is drawing first. I don't know if that's come from training. In order to figure out how I'm going to make something, I have to draw it first. And then if I can't figure out in the drawing, then I will make sketch models and go from there. But yes, everything starts with the drawing, and that's what the client sees as well, so that they know how to move forward with the project.
That's interesting to think about that relationship, about what you're showing the client and it being a sketch and then developing it further. I was also wondering about, when you come across like an object or a shape that you might not have tackled before, is that a challenge?
It's most of the time.
Yeah,
it is. But for me, that's where the pleasure lies in it. If I'm just doing the same things over and over again, I would get very bored very, very quickly. So I embrace new challenges in that way. And a lot of the joy is in figuring out, and then the moment of inspiration when actually something falls into place and it works.
And in terms of finding what works for you, in terms of like paper brands, do you use different types of papers and paperweights?
Yeah, I've got a massive plans chest in my studio. It takes up half of the studio, and it's 18 drawers that are filled with years and years of collections of paper. And then there's more drawers elsewhere of different sizes as well. But I can work in any paper. If it's too thin, then I'll bond it to a heavier weight of paper. But it's very much led by the project. So sometimes I'm asked to do things with ephemera, things like receipts or old maps, things like that. And I might use the originals, or I might scan them and then print them out on a paper that I like to work with. The Fabriano papers are really good for the all-white images, but they also go through a laser printer really well. So if I want to print a texture on something, or like I say, receipts or maps, then I can print out on that and then make from those papers.
Oh, it's so fascinating to hear about that collection. I was also interested, do you predominantly use a scalpel over scissors, to be precise?
Yeah. That is my tool of choice, really, is a Swan Morton short-handled scalpel with a 10A blade. And I do use other things as well, but that's the thing I always come back to. And I know a lot of other people find them really uncomfortable to work with.
I was going to say, have you got calluses?
Yeah.
I've done bits of crafting in the past and it only takes a couple of hours. And I'm like, oh, my poor finger.
What I find is that when I go on holiday and I'm not cutting for a couple of weeks, it's like the calluses come to the surface out of the skin and I have to build them up again when I go back. But I don't hold it like a knife, I hold it like a pencil. So it's like I'm drawing with the scalpel, and it just works for me. And then there's one particular pair of scissors that I picked up in a silk mill. They just sit really nicely in your hand. So if there's something that works better with scissors, those are my scissors of choice. But, you know, it was about 20 years before I discovered those particular scissors. And I've bought other ones that look the same, but they're not the same.
I also wanted to ask, for the sake of our listeners, but I do know the answer to this because I saw it on your Instagram, but in terms of your best glue, the kind of glue you use.
Yes, Yoo-hoo.
Yes, I saw.
My Jenga tower of Yoo-hoo. Yeah, when I first started doing it professionally, I did sit with every glue I could find at the time to work out which is the best one for working in for me. And I like Yoo-hoo because it bonds strongly without rippling the paper, but not so quickly that you can't adjust and move it around a little bit just to get the right overlap and the right form. So it has enough leeway for me for what I need.
It really sounds like it's being familiar with the materials, and you have this kind of collection of materials to work with. So it feels like getting that familiarity.
I do. Every so often, though, I'll see something that another paper artist is using on Instagram or wherever. And I go, oh, that looks quite good. So I'll source it, I'll find it, I'll try it, and then end up going back to my same 4 or 5 tools that I've had for years.
And in terms of trying to use all of this material to not create waste, what's the best way, or is there an effective way to cut a sheet of paper? Do you use it all?
I do use it all. I mean, I have a tiny little box on my desk, which is just the smallest little scraps, because I hate the idea of, if you just need like a centre of a flower and you just need a dot, cutting into a fresh piece of paper just for that seems really wasteful for me. So I do keep all the little offcuts, bit of a hoarder.
Being very efficient, isn't it? Sustainable.
Yeah. The drawings that I do, they also become my templates. So once the drawings have been approved, I'll then make another file that's just of the templates, those parts of the drawings, and print those out and spray mount them onto the paper. So when I'm doing that, sometimes I'll do it on a light box or just using the angle poise in front of me or daylight. And so I can see, if I just shove that up into the corner a little bit more, I will waste less paper.
Yeah. And Ruth, is that where you come in a bit to see some of those earlier sketches?
Well, it sort of starts quite a long time before that, I'd say, because it's terribly chicken and egg, really, in terms of the evolution of a book like this. Because obviously Gail's drawings are such a big part of it, but then there's also Richard's drawings, and Richard Ferguson is our in-house paper engineer. We're lucky enough to have a full-time in-house paper engineer, and he's really instrumental to the way the books that we work on together certainly come together, because each page sort of feeds into the next one.
It's very much teamwork, all of this.
Yeah, you've got to think beyond just one image and think how that image works with the page behind it and maybe the page behind that, because of all the multiple cuts through it mean that you can see through so many spreads at a time, and you've got to make sure you're not seeing a bit of text through them by accident. So actually with Paper World, it normally starts with a conversation between me and Richard, and often some very loose, terrible editorial doodles that Richard mocks up into something to show where the cuts could be and where the flaps might go. And at that point, Gail turns a series of cuts and flaps into something very beautiful with her sketches. And then it sort of comes back to us and maybe tweaks a bit to say, the text might need to go here and be a bit longer. And then it goes to colour. So it is quite a lot of back and forth.
There is. It's like one layer builds on another. And one of the nice things about this book is there's, as well as the flaps and the cut-throughs, because each of the pages is a double layer of paper, there's opportunities for this sort of a fake layering effect on it, and the cut-throughs as well. So sometimes a bit of a sky and a cloud, they'll both be on the same page, and then it cuts through to reveal something from the page below, or 2 pages below, or 3 pages below. So there's a lot of discussion and back and forth over what's going to work and what isn't.
It's very sculptural, isn't it?
Yeah. It's very much, it's like 3D chess, really, at the time.
And it's equally mind-bending at times.
I was also, this is a slightly different question, but I was thinking as well about finishing touches in some of your work, Gail, with lighting. So when you're constructing a piece, is there a sense of how you'll light it or how it will be lit?
So when I started, my paper sculptures were complete. So I might either build them to camera if they were very large, or they would be on a baseboard that I would take to a photographer and they would photograph them. And then as time's gone on and the industry has developed, in order to keep flexibility as much as anything else, I've started doing my own photography. I'm not an expert photographer, so I keep it very, very simple. I do play with an angle poise whilst I'm making the things to see which side would be better to light from. But on the whole, I tend to light left to right, because for me, unless there's a detail that's going to be lost that way, because we read left to right, somehow the lighting going left to right across the page takes you that way as well visually. So
that's so interesting, yeah.
And the way I work now is I make individual pieces, not necessarily all in the same scale to each other, just at the scale that works best in paper, and I photograph them individually. So then the final file can actually be given on layers as a Photoshop file, which means that a client can extract some part of it, or if, like Paper World, if something needs to move, we can move it quite easily, or scale it up or scale it down in order to fit with the final artworks.
It does make it so much easier, you providing the files like that. I've got to say, we don't do a lot of books that have sort of more than 2D art, but having you photograph it and provide it in that setup with the files is really helpful, because we've had some books where we've had to photograph them ourselves or scan them ourselves, and it makes a lot more back and forth between us and the artist, and it also adds a lot of cost to the project, which then has to be factored in and is something that can be a setback.
I mean, the cost aspect was one of the reasons why I started doing it in the first place, because there'd be jobs that I wanted to do because they were exciting projects, but then the entire budget was being eaten up by the photography, or it wasn't coming out the way I envisaged it would, because it wasn't necessarily even a photographer that I was involved with. I'd give the sculpture over, and then it would come back at the end and be like, oh, that's a bit disappointing. So this gives me a lot more control over the final outcome as well as the flexibility.
And also, when you photograph the work, it's upright, is that correct?
Generally, I mean, I do sometimes overhead photography and have it on the floor, but on the whole, most of the time I just put a little support behind the 3D element that I'm photographing and photograph it against a white background.
And I guess we kind of touched on this a bit when we talk about the chicken and the egg of working together, but I was thinking about the time available for commission, and does that affect the complexity of a piece?
100% it does. Yeah, it really does. I mean, I get quite a generous time on these. Not on the first one, I didn't.
I was going to say, I didn't think you felt like that. That's good
to know. No, it gives me enough time to actually be able to engross myself in the world and do the visual research that I want to do in them. The first one was a very tight turnaround, I think.
I think that was a tricky schedule.
So if you look back through the books, the level of detail in that one is far less than the ones that I've done since. And the thing about these books is I had wanted to do an entire book for years. I'd done covers, I'd done 2 or 3 illustrations of a book, but I'd never done an entire book before. So when they approached me and asked me to do it, I was like, I am all in on this. This is my legacy piece. This is, and I never thought they would come back for more and more and more.
But we just keep coming back.
You do. Every one I think is going to be the last one. So I put my heart and soul into it and they come back for more. But they're a great team to work with and they're great projects to work on. So, yeah, as long as they keep coming, I'll keep doing them, basically.
Excellent.
And in terms of the timing, Ruth, you were saying you felt like it wasn't a generous amount of time to work on the...
Well, they're such complicated books and the work that Gail produces is so intricate and detailed. I mean, when you were asking her if there's ever been things that are really difficult to illustrate, I was just thinking of the coral reef in Ocean, which I think has got to be the piece that's most impressed me from everything you've done across the whole series.
Yeah, that was a heart and soul piece, yes.
It's incredible, all the brain corals and the different shapes.
Yeah, the variety. Honestly, when we're doing the books, I feel like I could go, on Mastermind or something because I know so much from doing the books.
We'd make a good pub quiz team.
Only when we're doing the books. About a month after it's delivered, I forget the whole lot all over again. So, but we're building up quite a nice bank of imagery now as well from doing them all. So at the moment, I'm working on the next one, which is trees. But in Oceans, we were illustrating mangroves and things like that. So it means that now I've got things that I can pull on from old ones, which means that the illustrations I'm doing now can be even richer because I can fill them out with this back catalogue of more imagery. So they are getting fuller and fuller and more complex as time goes on, just because they can, really.
Yes. You're making a whole world for yourself, a paper universe.
I am, basically, yeah.
Because I was thinking about what the most complex construction is for commission, but it sounds like they're getting more complex as you're progressing.
They are, but like I say, every project has its own challenges. I think the one that I found the most difficult to realise was one that was an actual physical piece, and it was for a campaign to end bed blocking. And they were all going to be exhibited at the end, but each artist had to take a bed and do their thing with it. But they were going to be displayed in open spaces and then in a gallery space. So paper and the elements don't go well together. So I wanted to do a bed of roses with tumbling roses going through the hospital bed, but I had to test lots of different papers to find something or a material that I could use in the same way as I use paper that would withstand the elements. So that was, I think, 2018, 2019, and that bed is now in someone's garden. And I saw it recently, and it's all mildewed, but it has survived, which is astonishing to me. So it was worth all the research on the paper.
It's incredible.
But every project has its own challenges, and they all come left field. You never know what it's going to be.
And how long has that survived?
Well, it must be 7 years, I think. 6, 7 years it's survived.
I'm impressed.
It must be setting some kind of record.
Yeah.
I know we touched on this, the calluses in the hands, but for our listeners, I'm sure they're probably interested in how you take care of your hands, and do you do any exercises, Gail?
I knit. I got arthritis in my hands about 10 years ago, and I was told to either knit or learn to play piano, and I'm not musical, so I learned to knit instead. But yes, and I've had repetitive strain injury in the past as well, particularly one project where I was doing a whole series of handbags and I was embossing lizard skin onto them. And I couldn't use my hands for about a month afterwards. So I won't be doing that again. But just basic things as well, like have to wash my hands multiple times a day so I don't get grease on the paper. I can't have long nails because it dints the paper. I very rarely varnish nails because the Yoo-hoo glue melts it. So, yeah, there's quite a few hand things go on.
Moving on from hands, I'm just thinking something about digital. And I know you'll have been affected, Gail, by digital programs and requirements from clients. So do you think it's still important to have equal knowledge of the use of digital tools?
I do if it's useful to me. I mean, I don't use Illustrator. I only know how to use Photoshop. When iPad Pro came in with the Apple Pencil, that was very exciting because suddenly it meant that I could do a drawing for a client on layers very easily and make adjustments rather than having to constantly rub things out, which was what I was doing before. So it speeds things up, and the bit that I am interested in is the working in paper, the hands-on bit. So anything that speeds the process through and means that I have a longer time and more luxury of working in that aspect of it works for me.
And I guess moving on, thinking about digital tools with amendments, I guess for both of you, thinking about how can amendments be managed digitally?
Yeah, I mean, quite often I do them in Photoshop. I'll redo things. And because I do this thing of working on layers in Photoshop, if an entire background needs to be changed, then I'll photograph another piece of paper and change the background. My retouching skills go so far. If it's beyond my skills, either it'll be done in-house or I have a retoucher that I work with who I trust who does it for me. So there's, things are just way more flexible than they used to be.
And Ruth, do you find there's often quite a few amendments?
There can be. We tend to not to have too many at the final colour stage, I think. And where we do, it's more about hues or tones or text legibility sometimes. That can be a problem when we get stuff proofed and you find that the text black is quite tricky to read if there's a darker colour or the colours come out darker than we anticipated from viewing it on screen, or if the texture sort of comes through a bit too much. So I'd say that tends to be where we probably focus on making the colour edits.
Yeah.
And occasionally a fact checker will flag that a fish is the wrong colour or something, and we might have to tweak that. But I believe that that's when the in-house design team can go in and tweak little things.
Yeah, I don't think I've had
files.
to remake anything.
No.
I think it's all been done digitally.
But normally the big things get picked up at rough stage, so we do avoid those.
Yeah, and there's an expert as well, isn't there, on whatever the theme is.
Yeah,
double-checking everything as it goes along, through the drawing stages and right the way to the end. So
that's so interesting. Ian saying if the fish was the right colour. So someone's picking up all of these aspects.
So the editorial team will do a really thorough check in the first instance, but because we tend to write all of the complex novelty titles in-house, we do always have an expert lined up to make sure we're really getting our facts right, especially because there is such a wealth of information out there now that it's quite easy to get the misinformation if you're not really careful. So we always make sure we have somebody from perhaps a university or an institute, someone who really knows their business, to have a look at it, like you say, at roughs and at colour stage, and they'll be looking at the text and the artwork, so we don't accidentally get any fake facts out there.
Yeah, it's very reassuring, actually.
Yeah, it's quite a comfort blanket.
Yeah.
Gail, you're involved in Paper Artists Collective. Has that been useful for you?
I'm not actually a member of it, but my involvement is I follow them. Yeah. But they do these great challenges, and one of them is a month in paper, which is prompts. And I am terrible at posting on social media. I'll suddenly realise that it's been months since I posted anything because I've been too busy doing the work. But something like that where I actually, for a month, have somebody else telling me, this is your theme for the day, find something. It's not only good for the posting, but it's actually quite good for me to sort of look back at what I've been doing and reassess it. It's quite a nice little focal point. So they are great for promoting paper artists around the world.
I guess it'd be something if our listeners are interested in that, they could look up and follow what's happening around the world. Also, in terms of exploration outside of paper cut artwork, do you do other three-dimensional works?
Just as a personal thing, I do, yes. And I do more abstract paper sculptures for myself, and in those I might incorporate wire work or some textiles, that kind of thing. But they're more sort of personal projects. And as I said before, I knit a lot. I've become an obsessive knitter. But
I don't know if your knitting turns into sculpture or if you're making yourself cardigans.
Well, who knows where it will go? Yeah, at the moment, I'm quite enjoying having more clothes, but I realise that I think in 3D even when I'm working in 2D. So every few years, I like to take myself back to basics, and I'll go back to like a life drawing classes for 10 weeks or something like that, so that I go back to all what I see as the most basic skills and just reinforce them. And a couple of years ago, I went for a week's artist retreat in Florence to learn how to oil paint, because I'd never oil painted before. So I just think it's quite good to just not stay in your lane and just do your own thing. And the oil painting, I haven't done it since, but when I was doing it, I was seeing how I might start painting surfaces of paper and then incorporating it into the paper sculpture work. So who knows, watch this space. It might happen, it might not.
It's interesting, thinking about always learning and soaking up things and revisiting your practice. Ruth, I was interested for you, what's the appeal of illustration that is more than two-dimensional?
So I really think the appeal of something like this is that even when it's printed, it feels very tactile and it makes you just want to reach out and touch it. So it just draws readers in from the start. It's a great hook. So not only are you drawing the reader in, but I think it's a great USP in terms of how we pitch the book. I think Paper World is really unusual when you look at the rest of the market for children's non-fiction books. It's completely original, and readers do just want to pick that up and get sucked into it, I think.
So you find like readers are more responsive, they want to touch it?
Yeah, I think it's got good shelf appeal. I think people want to reach out, pick it up, see what it feels like, and once it's in their hands, they're sold really, because they're such beautiful books. There's definitely appeal to work that looks so handmade too, I think. There's so many digital things out there. Everyone's looking at their screens all day. And so I think when you can see a book where you can really feel the presence of the artist, it does draw you to it. I think that's why we love ink splatty lines when you see sketches, or why you like to see brush strokes in paintings. And in this paper cut work, you can really see the textures. You almost can feel the edges. You sort of want to trace them with your fingers.
We do deliberately try and do it so you can't necessarily see where the flap edges are. There's lots and lots of layers and you can't tell, but one of them is a real layer. So when you run your fingers over it, one of them, but just by looking at it, you don't necessarily notice it initially. So there's lots of little tricks and things in there as well, which is nice, just to keep the engagement going.
I think it just draws you in. I mean, I've seen, particularly when you present it in sales meetings, it feels very wrong to me to be here and not have a physical copy of it to flap at you and annoy the microphones, because I always talk about this book with a copy of it in my hands, because you have to see it to believe it almost. And when you present it in sales conferences and you have a copy, everybody wants to have their hands on it and be feeling it. And I think that is the appeal of it.
And Ruth, what drew you to choosing paper sculpture and Gail's work? Was it that tactile quality?
It was a funny one with this series, the way it came around. I think I'd actually seen a picture online of a map that was made with the contours done in paper art. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. That would be great to bring into a book in another way. And so I started having a series of chats with our in-house designer, Kieran Hood, and paper engineer Richard Ferguson about how we could sort of translate that into a book. And it went through quite a few iterations, and we ordered a lot of dummies through the production department. Here, I think we're getting a bit eye-rolly with us at one stage. And then we established a format, and it felt like it really needed to have a paper cut artist to work with the paper cut format. And it's quite meta, actually, in that way, I think. So we had a look around. And the first book in the series was actually illustrated by a different pair of illustrators, an Italian studio called Bomboland. And then when the schedule, which as you say was quite horrible on book 2, didn't work out, they couldn't manage it. But there was still demand to get a second book out quickly. And we found Gail, and it's really brilliant that we did, because it's been such a good collaborative process ever since. And I think we're on book 7 now, so it's just gone from strength to strength. And Gail's work is so bright and vibrant, and I think Gail's work appeals to lots of different people, so it does have child appeal, but it also appeals to a more of a crossover market, and adults really value it as well. Yeah. So I think the different sorts of people that will pick it up in a shop are quite varied.
Yeah.
It's interesting thinking about the whole team involved as well, because you've got an in-house paper engineer. How does that working relationship, does he kind of give advice on how maybe the fold should be, or?
It tends to leave me pretty much to it. He'll send me a dummy of 2 or 3 spreads at a time and how they're going to fit together, and we'll discuss what the sort of vision for those pages are. And I'll also get a lovely big chunk of visual reference for it, for the specifics. I'll still go on and do a lot more research myself on top of that, but it just means that I have got a really good guide for what there is in mind. And we've worked together so much now that, you know, he will go, I thought you could do this kind of thing for this and that kind of thing for that. So we've got a shorthand now that we didn't have initially. But I do find the team have also pushed me in what I do. So one really good example is back on the first space book, we're having to do these clouds, which I just wasn't quite nailing. They looked too much like normal clouds in the sky, not astral clouds, whatever they're called. And so I just had a day of experimenting with papers. And in the end, it worked out that if I backlit the papers and highlighted the fibres, it gave the right neon glow to achieve what Kieran, the designer, was after. And then from that, it just like, okay, so the sun, we'll do the sun that way. And so suddenly all these papers that I'd had in my plant chest drawers, I was seeing in a completely different way, because by backlighting them, I was seeing the structure of them and then putting coloured gels behind them to light them. And so suddenly it expanded my repertoire enormously. And that's just one example of how things have worked.
It was a big ask, because you think about how the sun looks, and, you know, you've got the solar flares coming off, and I think it was the Horsehead Nebula or something, wasn't it, that we were asking you to do. And how on earth do you illustrate that in any way, let alone in paper?
Yeah, and I didn't want to fall back on Photoshop tricks. I wanted it to be paper because I wanted it to have that tactile quality. So,
and I think in that book, more than in some of the more detailed sort of stuff, you can really see the textures of the paper, the fibre of the paper.
Yeah.
It's really well showcased.
Yeah, it was great being able to use them on all the different planets, and each planet having its own character by its own textures of paper and things. It was great.
I guess we're talking so much about the texture of paper and making with hands, but do you see or foresee a trend for the handmade over AI imagery? I know that's coming in, and a lot of our listeners will be kind of worried about AI. Do you have any thoughts about that?
There's 2 things that strike me. One is it does remind me of when Apple Macs first came into graphic design and everyone started panicking because it seemed like, you know, desktop publishing was going to take over and graphic design companies were going to be going under and we'd all be out of work, this, that and the other. And then within just a very few months, people very quickly realised that, yes, you know, someone with desktop computer at home and a good printer could produce something that looked very slick, but there was no substance to it. There was no cohesiveness. It didn't communicate. And I think particularly with illustration, what you put in is your ideas, your skill as a communicator on top of just the finished, slick polish. So I think AI, it's going to generate some interesting images, but if you're actually trying to communicate something, then you need an illustrator. You need the brain behind it, the ideas. And, you know, sometimes I get a commission where the idea is already there, it's already done, and they just basically come to me to finesse it, and I'll try and put my own spin or detail or something into it more. So even there, I think the illustrator will dominate. They will come out on top. But the other thing is that in the last 6 months, I have had 2 inquiries, neither of which came off, but 2 inquiries where they were double checking that all my stuff is made from paper, because they were having a policy of not using any AI generated images, and they wanted to see the human hand, and they were having spent years trying to get my cuts as sophisticated as possible, and everything really
Polished.
sharp and polished. Thanks, that's the word. They were saying, can you make it look a bit rougher? And I went, well, yeah, torn edges can be very beautiful. I'm more than happy to work that way. But it was just very interesting that they wanted it very much to be evidence of the human hand. And I think handmade illustrations are going to flourish in that kind of market, definitely.
That's great to hear that's happening.
Yeah.
I think people love to see it being made as well.
Yes.
I know that content online where we see artists making their work, videos of them showing you how they're drawing or cutting, and photos. I know that we've sent a team into your studio.
You have sent it into my studio before,
with your beautiful paper chest and your work.
Yes.
And there's a real interest in that from consumers, and those videos do get a lot of views and a lot of clicks. And I think it's because people love to see artists making their work. There's such a fascination, and it is a real draw.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's something that publishers are only going to, and other people, businesses are just going to keep marketing. That's going to be their USP.
Yeah, wouldn't be surprised.
Gail, has there been any other projects you'd like to tell our listeners about?
There's been a few standouts, but 2 that I have great fondness for and which really do stand out to me. One was the Kleenex Let It Out campaign, which is quite a few years ago now, but the images basically was 3 themes, and each image was a double take on an outcome, one positive, one negative. So it was a proposal, so it was yes and no. And on clouds floating around the central figure, there were, if they'd said yes, there would have been a baby, there would have been this and the other. And if they'd said no, then they would have lived their life alone. It's a long dining table. And then there was Glory Failure, which was based on Footballer, and King and a Fool, which was based on a pop star. And they were for an in-house project for Kleenex to basically award to their employees for best and worst things that had happened in the company that year. But JWT, the advertising company, just really liked what the art director and I did with them. So they started entering them into competitions, and then they were used in a couple of ads in newspapers and things for Kleenex. They hoped that Kleenex would take it up as a major campaign. They never did. But on the back of them, JWT getting behind the campaign, that ended up winning awards left, right and centre, including a gold lion at Cannes and 2 bronze. So that was a career-changing project that went from being this small in-house certificate almost to putting my work on a global stage. And it just changed my career completely. I'd had a good career up to that point. I'd had a nice steady flow of work, but suddenly I was just getting more work than I could handle. And the quality of projects coming in was just fantastic, and the people that I got to work with changed as well. So that was a big standout one. And then the second was a stamp for United Nations. And again, I'd done a stamp for them a few years before, which again they got behind. They put it into competitions and it won some awards. And then they came back to me to do a set of stamps for World Toilet Day. And I hadn't understood basically how important toilets are to communities around the world. I just thought about the basic hygiene side of things. But the stamps, they wanted one in particular to cover the impact it has on girls' education, having access to safe sanitation and a private space in which to, if they've got their periods and things, in which to clean themselves, etc. So many girls in so many countries fall out of education as they reach puberty. So I really wanted to pack so much into this tiny space on a stamp. I'm really, really proud of what we achieved with those stamps. They got taken on and printed elsewhere as well. And it was really a very, very rewarding project to work on.
Sounds great. Thank you for telling me about that, Gail. Ruth, is there any projects you'd like to tell our listeners about that you've worked on?
There aren't a huge amount of projects that we've worked on where the artists are quite as sculptural as Gail's artwork is. There's been a couple that we've done. There was one we did with an artist who uses pressed flowers in all of her artwork, Helen Aponsiri, and she has a huge drawer, a bit like you, but instead of being full of papers, it's full of pressed flowers and seaweeds and leaves, and she cuts those and creates wildlife illustrations from them.
Sounds amazing.
And yeah, we did a couple of books with her at Big Picture Press, A Year in a Wild and Beneath the Waves. And it was really interesting to see how she approached that through her sketches and then choosing the flowers and plants to create them. And actually Beneath the Waves, she used exclusively seaweeds and other things that she's collected from close to the coast. So she only used coastal species.
Was that her choice and was that something that she set on herself?
Yeah, she felt very strongly about that. And I know she went on a lot of expeditions to gather stuff specially and had to work well to see which seaweeds can be pressed and which ones are trickier.
Yeah.
So that was one that really stands out. But we do a lot more projects, I'd say, with illustrators who use textures, but they scan them and use them in a different way. So I know a lot of artists create more of a collage-y effect, I think, from piecing together digital or traditional illustration alongside scanned pieces. So particularly in picture books, I think that's a lovely look. Just think of like Charlie and Lola.
Yeah.
Or we've worked with a few people like Carmen Saldana and Tasha Durley who do use these techniques to give you a really textured, gorgeous look. So I think that's something that we're going to see more and more of, again, in opposition to more digital visuals.
When you're working with these people, do they do samples for you? Because I find working with you guys that, I do my drawing and you understand how it's going to translate into 3D. I don't have to do any samples, but for some clients, they can't make that leap. Even if I show them drawings from another project and how that translated into 3D, they can't make that leap. And so I have to sample sections of it so they can feel confident in going, yes, now you can go to final artwork. So do you need samples from people for any of them, or are you...
No, I think normally we sort of trust people based on the body of their work. We'll have looked at their portfolio with them, maybe looked at their sketchbooks and things and talked about what we like, what we want the book to look like. Normally people have a fairly diverse portfolio, so you can say we want it to look a little bit more like this sort of style than like this style, for instance, and you can base the conversations on that. And sometimes they'll want to try things out at the beginning and bounce things off you and say like this or like this. But I think there's normally a fair amount of trust and letting them take the lead.
I was thinking maybe about some takeaways for our listeners. One thing that I've picked up on in our conversations is just how important it is to understand the material. Like, Gail, your plan chest of all of these papers and the artist working with the seaweeds. That's something I would think of would be useful for our listeners. Is there anything else you could think of as maybe a takeaway or something to highlight?
I think getting footage of you making your work is a really good thing to show, either on your portfolio, your Instagram. Like you say, it shows that it's real, it shows that it's handmade, but it's just so interesting to people that it's going to draw them in. And I know that when you're sucked into the project, sometimes it's easy to forget to just set a little camera up in the corner and maybe get footage of you cutting for an hour, and then you can speed that up and it becomes really kind of hypnotic. But just making sure you remember that at the beginning, because otherwise sometimes I think publishers get to the end and say, have you got any footage of you drawing it? You're like, no, because I've already made it now.
Yeah, I agree, because I was on your Instagram, Gail, looking at your reels, looking at how you made things. It was really fascinating. And I guess, this conversation we're having about AI, wanting things to look a bit more rough, having that footage is really helpful for people to really understand the kind of what goes into the process of making the work.
Yeah. And I think also, when I started out, there were only 5 paper artists working commercially in the UK. And now there's a whole load of people. But people still seem to think that if you're paper artist, there's like one style. They forget that it's just a medium. It's just like watercolour, oils. There's so many things that you can do with it. So other paper artists aren't necessarily competition, because we're all working in our own styles and our own ways within that. And I think if you explore the material, the medium, and you find your own way of working with it, rather than trying to emulate and copy how other people work in it, then you're off and running, because you've developed your own style, you've developed your own thing.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh,
it's been so interesting.
For information on illustration business, including licensing and contracts, AOI members can check out our website for resources on a huge range of topics, including access to the pricing calculator tool, which assists in working out fee levels for quotes, and 2024's pricing survey. Members can also learn more about the creation of handmade artwork for illustrators in our How to Get into Handmade Illustration publication, available through Inside Illustration online. Previous episodes of Inside Illustration are also available, with top guests providing loads of practical information on the illustration world across a whole range of areas, from children's books to gaming. Do give them a listen, and thank you for listening.